Good afternoon, everybody. Welcome to today's TIA live stream. We're talking about the quarter four fraud and cargo theft update with three wonderful panelists and subject matter experts who will be introducing themselves further shortly. We're very excited for this update today, and we really hope that we can get some interaction, some questions, some comments, some feedback, anything we would love to see. So please, throughout the conversation today, if you have any questions or comments for our presenters, feel free to put them in the LinkedIn chat or wherever chat you are viewing this. If you're on YouTube, you can see the chat there as well. Before we get started, everyone, I just want to go through the TIA antitrust statement. Discussion, comments, and presentations during TIA functions must not refer to any past, present, or future rates, prices, or anything related thereto. Include any reference to marketing strategies, include any discussion of boycotts of any person, product, or firm, or inhibit any members' employees from discussing employment with other member companies. Things you hear during the meeting that are confidential and private to TIA should not be shared publicly without its prior consent or used against or in competition with TIA. Additionally, when you want to come back and review this recording later on, or you want to send it out to your colleagues to make sure they get that great nugget of wisdom that we're going to touch on in a minute here, you can come back to wherever you are currently watching this webinar, whether that is on LinkedIn or YouTube. You can come back to this location and view the recording there, which will be processed following the conclusion of the event today. Additionally, if you do think of a question after the event has concluded today, you can still comment on the event or email us at education@tianet.org with the subject live stream with your question, and we will aim to get back to you as soon as possible. Additionally, that banner at the bottom of your screen includes our email. So if you need to send an email there, whether that's a question about TI education or exactly on the webinar, please feel free to reach out. We would love to hear from you. And with that, I will turn it over to our panelists to begin their introduction and discussion. Thank you, everyone. We appreciate it.
All right. Well, thanks for having us, Anthony. We're looking forward to doing this. Two people that I know very well and that I've done a lot of stuff with before. So happy to be here. I'll start off. I have a 30-plus year background in cargo theft investigations and supply chain security. I currently serve as the chairman of TAPA, the Transport and Asset Protection Association, and the vice chair under Dan of the TIA Cargo Theft Task Force. So happy to be here, happy to contribute to TIA and everything that they try and do for the members.
Yeah, I'll go next. My name is Dan O'Sullivan. I am the current sitting chairman of the Fraud Task Force at TIA. I am the owner and operating manager of United States of Freight. We are a third-party logistics company, primarily based in South Florida. This is the subject of strategic straight cargo theft and the associated fraud that's plaguing our industry is at the front of brain for me. It's something that I see as a primary risk for the supply chain and by extension our individual businesses. And that's why I take this matter exceedingly seriously and have worked very hard to align with folks like Scott and Andrew and more broadly speaking TIA in efforts to educate, advocate, and also increase awareness throughout the supply chain in an effort to curtail the current increase in incidences of both cargo theft and broader fraud. So thank you for having me.
Hi, I'm Andrew Smith, Senior Vice President at Circle Logistics. I've been in the industry for 15 years. I serve on the board of the directors of the TIA and as chairman of the TIA Fraud Task Force Vendor Advisory Committee, which is very adjacent to Dan's group. I've spearheaded a lot of the efforts to combat and prevent fraud at Circle. This year we moved over 200,000 truckloads without a single incident of fraud. So we've done a lot of great things and put a lot of great measures in and a lot of expense to prevent fraud with some pretty good success. So happy to share some of those best practices with you guys today.
Yeah, so guys, I'll get us kicked off just because I just literally got home last night from the T2 conference that was in Boca. It's one of the two TAPA conferences that are held every year, and I would just start off by saying this: it was absolutely packed, right? So this is a top tier subject for everybody. Attendance was actually absolutely maxed out. One of the great things to see was we had good attendance from the FBI, DOT, FMCSA, right? So they're participating, they're interacting, they're working closely or trying to work closely with the industry, which was great to see. On day one, I led an intelligence panel where cargo theft and the latest and most up-to-date cargo theft intel was shared with the team for the United States, or with the attendees. So for the United States, there was talk about the new normal, and I've talked about this for quite some time, that one of the most common questions I get when I present or teach, or when we're doing events for the TIA, is when is this going to go back to normal? And the numbers that are coming out and the numbers show that this is the new normal, right? There is not a go back to, right? There is not a step back to what it used to be like in 2019 or 2020. It started to tick up in 2021 significantly. And, if you use the CargoNet numbers between 2021 and 2024, an overall 93% increase in cargo theft, and then strategic theft of 14%, right? So last year, CargoNet reported 3,048 reported cargo thefts. Actually, I got that number wrong. That's right. 3,048 reported cargo thefts, and this year they're projecting 36. So when we talk about the CargoNet numbers, I always say, remember, cargo theft is not mandatorily reported in the United States, right? So the numbers that CargoNet gets are great numbers, and they give great statistics and trending, but I always say it's about 1/10 of all the cargo theft that takes place. So you multiply those numbers by 10, we're actually probably in the neighborhood. Overhaul, as an example, said that they project that there's almost 90,000 cargo thefts a year in the United States if you include rail. Rail's a huge, I think the top three rail last year reported 65,000 thefts, right? So that's a huge chunk of that. But so if you subtract that 90,000, 65,000, you're in that neighborhood of the numbers that I'm projecting off of the CargoNet numbers, right? So really good information there. But what it basically shows us is we're flat. We're getting flat, right? And flat becomes the new normal. So, prior years, the reports were based off of 1,200, 1,300, 1,100. So we're almost 3 times what we used to be in those 2019, 20, 21 numbers.
Well, I think, Scott, if I could just jump in as well. I think if you just do a short back of the envelope on that, if you assume that there's let's use the 90,000, and bearing in mind that those are reported, right, as opposed to how many are not reported. So let's just, if we work with the 90,000, that's putting it upwards of 350 instances a day. I think
that's, remember, that's combined rail and road and everything like that, right? Rail's a huge chunk of that.
Yeah. The simple truth is that, it is something that, that we have in our midst. And I think certainly from our perspective, it can seem like a bit of an abstract concept, which is why it's so critical for folks that are involved, either as an intermediary or otherwise, to have a set of protocols in place, and appropriately layered and implemented into their business and their processes, to ensure, a relatively tight environment, and also a plan in place, for, the unfortunate eventuality that something does take place and there is a situation that arises in the form of an actual occurrence of theft. And some of the things that we've implemented at TIA, broadly speaking, is one of the things we did last year was produce a post-incident checklist, because I think there needs like a like a break the glass, pull the fire alarm. Where do we go? What are the steps that need to be taken? Because time is critical. Particularly with some of the larger more strategic instances. So that's one thing that we try to reinforce both internally and more broadly speaking at the task force level.
Yeah. So let me just reiterate something you said there. TIA members have access to what to do in the event of a theft type of document. So if you're a TIA member, I would encourage you to do that. Andrew, any thoughts on the numbers that I threw out?
We've done a really good job internally at Circle. I can only speak from my experience this year preventing a lot of fraud, but there are some things that they're starting to circumvent some of the processes that we've put in that are making our lives more difficult. I think the number one thing to put on the radar is now the very legitimate carriers that are on their last dollar and going out of business and saying, yeah, let's just go and steal some loads. And it's absolutely just straight theft by the carrier. The picture of the driver's license you get, the VIN number on the truck, the photo of the truck, the photo of the driver, everything checks out. And they show up to pick up the load and the load's gone. The good news is there are still some ways to find these carriers. It's not perfect, but we have some safeguards and metrics that we put in place. First of all, I think it's very important to identify your loads that have a high propensity for theft and manage those separately from the rest of your freight. Mm-hmm. Higher touches, more eyes, maybe a higher standard of carrier selection for those loads. We internally won't put a new carrier or a carrier without a certain number of history on that lane or in that market or in that region or on that account for us. The TIA has got a ton of tools available inside of the TIA education portal. I know there's been hundreds of hours by multiple committees and Jonathan Baker at the education committee put into those education materials. We've got our committee has put out a vendor selection guideline that's in there. So you can look at all the different vendors you should have, whether it's in your tech stack or physically. I think 3 years ago, we were seeing a night and day difference by the involvement of law enforcement. One thing we did is we put a PI on retainer, and getting a PI and maybe if your insurance company has a special investigations unit, those are very helpful too. Call them immediately. A lot of what these actors do, I can remember a couple of years ago, a load from California to Pennsylvania that we thought might have been stolen, and the load had never left California, right? And they were spoofing their macro point pings and trying to string us along. Now, the reason they go for these long mile hauls is they're trying to buy time.
Yeah, they need
continue
time
to steal more freight.
They want the bigger window.
Yeah, exactly. And a lot of brokers fall for this trap of, oh, well, maybe it's not that bad. Let's wait and see what happens tomorrow. Well, in the meantime, they might steal 10 other loads from 10 other brokers. And I think it's extremely important to file as many reports as you can immediately on these folks once you know a load has been compromised. That we can all share and crowdsource this information. I've been tagged on hundreds of emails the last 3 or 4 years where it's, hey, do you know something about this? Do you know something about that? And we've helped each other find each other's loads from that. The PI example I gave you, we had a load that disappeared, and we called the PI immediately, and he just happened to be watching the police scanner and was able to recover at least 2/3 of a load because they had pulled over a driver who was operating without a proper license, without proper registration. And I know at one point I was at a Carrier Sure fraud conference, and they had the folks from Cargo Theft Task
The
Force.
CTIPS
Yep.
task force. Yeah.
And I
Great
asked
group.
them,
Great
I
group.
said, hey, of the folks that you arrest, how many of these guys are illegals or here illegally? And his response was 80+%. And so I think now with this whole conversation around non-domiciled CDLs and English language proficiency, I also think that, yes, for the sake of that issue in and of itself, but there's also a cargo fraud element here too, where I think brokers should try to identify and avoid using these carriers to reduce their risk. There's some really great tools out there with Highway, and another company that we're working with, Search Carriers, which inspection information, which carriers have had these types of violations. And so I think it takes a really holistic approach, because it's changed so much. It's not just the load board phishing and double brokering and strategic theft anymore, as it is just straight theft.
Yeah, a couple things I'll touch on that you mentioned. One, time is of the essence, right? And it's one of the big things that we talked about at the conference over the last couple of days is, the windows for, so again, I've been doing this stuff for over 30 years, right? And the windows for recoveries have shrunk. It's always been a thing where you needed to start reacting to a theft within the first 24 to 48 hours. That's never changed, right? But the level of importance for that now has changed because so much of what's stolen today, whereas in the past, over the years that I would be working cases, or others would be working cases, it was going to be sold here in the US. And so you could find it. You had a much longer window to find it. So that time is of the essence thing, and knowing what to do and who to call is critical. If I go to some of the hot points that have been discussed over the last couple of days, number one, I think, was, the industry continuing to be consistent with the lingo, right? So, the words freight fraud have been used a lot lately, but that's not the category, right? Cargo theft is the category. And it's two categories within cargo theft. It's straight theft and strategic theft. And in that strategic theft bucket, we see freight fraud, right? Fraud is one of the multiple methods that's used in that strategic theft category. And the reason this is important is because that's the language that law enforcement is adopting. That's the language that the FBI has adopted as they're going out and working with the industry and everything like that. So it's always important to be consistent on that. I think the second thing is, and you kind of touched on it a little bit, Andrew, was it is absolutely clear that when it comes to the strategic theft category, the point of pickup is the weak link in the supply chain, right? That right when it exchanges hands, if you look at the CargoNet numbers that are tied to strategic theft, warehouse or distribution center is like 90% of where that happens. Now, that's not anybody breaking into a warehouse or a distribution center. That's where the freight changes hands and is handed off to the bad guys or to the person that the bad guys are sending. And the last thing I'll touch on what you said about, everything checks out on a carrier and stuff like that. Be careful on that. It can get very confusing. There are a lot of bad guys out there who are using false information to get legitimate identification, right? And then that legitimate identification is used to build their company. So now everything is built on something that checks out, right? But if I have if I have identification that says I'm Scott Cornell, but I'm really not Scott Cornell, but I use false information to get an identification that says I'm Scott Cornell, it's going to check out, right? And what we see is they do that. They steal 10 or 12 loads, and then they just throw everything in the garbage, the company paperwork, the company name, the identification they've got, and everything like that, because they were never Scott Cornell, right? And so they can then go and do it all over again and start up on the theft. So it's very confusing out there right now. I always say, for the majority of my time doing this, there's maybe 5 or 6 methods in play at any one time. Now there's 25 to 30 methods in play at any one time, and it's extremely confusing for anybody in the industry trying to combat it.
There's a good question that came in. We introduced MFA in October. It stopped the compromised carrier emails. I want to add something in there that I felt like was a big part of what we did. We had MFA on a lot of our carrier communication. It wasn't until we put it over on top of the rate con. If you're still sending traditional PDF rate confirmations, you're leaving yourself exposed. There's a lot of new tech out there where what we do now is we send a link and then the carrier has to get their identity verified to get access to the rate con. That's been a big help, big needle mover for us. The follow-up question is, we're dealing with qualified carriers with fake delivery and provide a fraudulent POD. We've seen that more in cluster and pilferage theft. And so I caution you to look at if there's other similar loads. Expect that maybe there are several technologies out there now. I'm trying to remember off the top of my head. Peruse AI might be one. I think there's some others that are reading these documents and can look for manipulation with AI. That's one tool I would suggest. Scott, what else do you have?
Well, I'll let Dan chime in just in case he has anything he wants to add on this.
I mean, no, nothing that particularly with respect to to other providers that but again, it all comes down to having to do to shorten the timeline, right? Using technology in a fashion that will make the time to identification of something being compromised, cutting down on that timeline and that lag. And one of the things that you mentioned, Scott, that I think is really critical and something that we've seen come up time and time again, and is in large part of our our recent push towards integrating the shipper side of the supply chain into our dialogue, is the preponderance or the proportion of actual theft being at the point of pickup.
Yeah.
Right. And how critical it is to have that, our shipper partners, aligned with, our efforts to curtail or create a more difficult environment, right? By raising awareness at the facility, raising awareness at the shipper level, that this is not just a problem for intermediaries or otherwise. That is it's a consistent theme across the supply chain, and
That's exactly right.
The best way to do that is to integrate all points in the chain to the level of the problem, because at the end of the day, the theft impacts everybody. So
yeah, that's a big part of the theme of what's been talked about lately is, the cargo thieves, they watch what the industry does and how the industry reacts, and they look for the gaps, they look for the weak points, right? And they clearly have seen that point of pickup is a weak point. And right, so you're seeing a lot more. I will tell you, over the last 2 days, there was probably 3 sessions just about the point of pickup, right? How to interact with the drivers, how to work with the drivers, how shippers and freight brokers should communicate and cooperate with one another on verifying the carrier before they come, and then verifying them again at the point of pickup. There are several vendors out there that can help with that, but you have to have a process in place, right? When you talk about, Andrew, you mentioned highway, there's verified carrier, there's, some of the other ones that you mentioned, things like that. Those need to be an enhancement of a process that you already have in place, right? There is no silver bullet. We talk about this all the time. You have to have a foundational process. The freight broker security requirements that came out this year through TAPA provide a really good foundational mechanism for putting that in place. Or you can build your own. And I've seen several companies like Circle or what Dan does or others out there that really spend a lot of time, internally taking a good look at yourself. And I think one of the things I think you've both been really good at is taking a hard look at yourselves, right? There's no, there was a topic in there of over the last couple of days about companies thinking that, they had the best, all of a sudden they get hit, right? And knowing both of you, I know you don't have that perspective. You have a perspective of what can I learn tomorrow? What can I learn today? What am I doing yesterday that doesn't work today, right? And that constant revision or constant looking at yourselves with a critical eye, but in a positive way of, I have to stay on top of this. I can't just sit on my laurels and go forward. I have to make the adjustments because the cargo thieves are adjusting every day. Over the last couple of weeks, I've seen slight tweaks in some of the methods that just, they would amaze you on how effective those slight tweaks are for the thieves in order to get through what the industry puts in place.
It really takes an entire culture of fraud prevention. I remember in late 2022 when we really started to see the first increase in cargo theft or fraud attempts. We did a lot of training and discussion with our leadership team and our managers, and some training with maybe some reps on the front line. But it wasn't really until we developed a culture of fraud, and not just with your frontline carrier reps, but track and trace, accounting, IT, that we really saw the entire company get on board. And there's not one particular product or tech stack that I can sit here and recommend and say, this is the silver bullet for you, right? For us, it's been probably a tech stack of 8 to 10 vendors. We're getting a lot of questions about MFA. We are using at Circle Highways Identity Engine when we're setting up a carrier, when we're interacting with a new carrier, a new contact, or rate confirmation. There's lots of different vectors they look at depending on different risks for those carriers or the type of load that we're looking at. But it's a very blended approach. And we also have a in-house fraud prevention team that's proactively looking at flags before, at the point of sale, after the point of sale, at the point of dispatch, at the point of pickup, and multiple times through the life cycle. And I can tell you in the last 6 months about a half a dozen times where we prevented a load that we thought was going to get stolen within a matter of not hours, minutes.
Isn't it amazing, Andrew, when you get all that stuff in place? Isn't it amazing? Isn't it a little shocking how many times you catch something where you think, boy, we just, had we not have all these things in place, how many loads we could have potentially lost and things like that. I think people will find it shocking. And I think, you touched on something we preach about, Dan and I preach about a lot on the cargo theft task force for the TIA, is you have to develop that culture. And that culture means your sales team has to be involved. They have to be communicating with whoever's in charge of security or theft prevention. Everybody from soup to nuts in the company has to be part of it. It has to be a part of the way you do business, not, hey, over here we do sales, over here we do capacity, over here we do, verification, over here. You have to meld it all together. It has to dovetail together in order for it to be effective.
Yeah, Scott, you're absolutely right. It's amazing what we've caught and prevented. And I would say, had we not,
it almost scares you, right?
It would have been the difference between us being profitable and not, right? And I've read several reports. I remember a broker carrier in Texas going out of business, citing fraud and theft earlier this year. I think I read, I don't remember which publicly traded company it was, but in their earnings report, mentioned several big write-downs from fraud and cargo theft. So it's an existential threat to the logistics industry and could push someone out of profitability right now.
Yep. I think we lost Dan, unfortunately. But Anthony, I know we're at time. I don't know if you want us to wrap up or.
Scott, that was some great analysis there. And Andrew, thanks for addressing some of the questions we received in the comments. Just a reminder, everyone, while we have you here, if you do have any remaining comments or questions, please let us know in the chat, and we would love to see. Scott, Andrew, or Dan.
Anthony, we lost your sound, but I think what Anthony was saying is if you have any comments or questions, you can reach back out to the TIA, and we'll follow up on those. I know there was a question in there on where to get the document. Anthony, I don't know if you're back or not, if you want to try and talk, but.
Can you guys hear me?
Nope. Can't hear you. So
I can hear him, Scott.
I'll close this out. Dan, we lost you for a minute. Anything you want to say in closing?
Am I back?
You're back.
I just wanted to make sure. I think just in closing, I think that there's I think the document authentication is one one of the critical parts, and one that we there are a number of of methods that can be used for verification. But I think one of the things that that consistently is the main takeaway, and I think Andrew was was good about banging the drum there, as were you, Scott, as well, is that it really is a a layered process that has technology, practice, protocols, and and across the chain awareness, right? Yep. So it's training of existing people, new people that come into your organizations, raising their level of awareness, physical security, and stuff like that. And that's through communication with with our shipper colleagues as well. Mm-hmm. Some of the good work that the vendor advisory committee has done as well in creating an actual list of some of the providers on the vendor side that can assist with much of this identification and troubleshooting. The effort to vetting our carriers and such, especially newer ones that you don't have an operating history with, and Scott, what you raised is that you'd be amazed at when you look at one event or one instance that you were able to prevent, and looking back at your history and think of how many we could have prevented, or what we are actually working to learn from that in preventing something in the future. Yep. You're talking about a critical amount of not just actual hard dollars today, but opportunity dollars later. The time spent, the time sucked, the resource allocation to this, and man hours, right? You have to look at it as your return on investment will come later.
Right. So I'll close this out by doing a plug for the TIA. I will say I'm proud to be on the TIA task force with you, Dan, and I'm on the vendor committee with you, Andrew. And I think all those are just of all the things the TIA is trying to do to address this topic for their members. A lot of resources the TIA puts in place for this. They put a lot of effort into getting people like us together to get the message out and the word out. They spend a lot of time at it at their conferences. If you're a TIA member, there's a lot of resources for you. I would encourage you to dig into the TIA and find out where those resources are. And there's more resources coming that I don't think they want us to talk about yet, but there's a few extra things they're building that are really exciting, that are going to be coming and make a big difference for their members. And so if you're not a member of the TIA, you should be. To me, it's one of the best organizations that I've ever interacted with. I'm proud to be associated with it. So with that, I'll close this out. Anthony, sorry we lost you, but thanks
everyone.
Thank you guys.
Thanks, Andrew, Dan, Scott.
Thanks, everyone.
Thanks, everyone.
Can't hear you, Anthony, so you can just close us down.
By the way, for the new TIA fraud hotline in the chat. Dan, you want to say something about that? I'm surprised you didn't mention it. I saw your
can't
phone
hear you
at
either
FBI
anymore,
headquarters.
Andrew, so Anthony, you might as well just shut us down.
Bye, everybody.
Bye, everyone.
Thanks, everyone.